Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to yet another edition of Doom Mod Madness. This time round, we are checking out Operation Body Count, which, believe it or not, is actually a sequel to a fairly awful 1994 original. If you're not well acquainted with the original Operation Body Count, it was a game powered by the Wolfenstein 3D engine and featured you battling your way up the UN building, which had been taken over by Middle Eastern themed terrorists, ultimately going after the leader Victor on the top floor. It was rubbish. It was comprehensively terrible. In fact, I would advise in the strongest possible terms not to even bother with the original Operation Body Count, but this essentially transforms it into what it should have been in the first place. So what exactly do you get with this edition of Operation Body Count? Well, the villain of the original is still alive and kicking. He's been arrested in this building, only his evil terrorist cohorts have invaded to free him. And thus begins a campaign spanning multiple locations across the globe, sometimes influenced by iconic action movies of the past, and generally a bunch of extremely well-constructed levels, usually multi-tiered, much like this one right here, and comprising of multiple objectives for you to complete before you can head for the exit. For the most part, however, and living up to the name of the game, you will be spending the vast majority of your time racking up a fairly significant body count, and yes, that also includes suicide bombers. Ultimately, however, this does feed into the objective-based nature of this mod, because it's necessary to clear floors before you can do certain actions, such as rescue hostages, for example. As for the enemies you'll be dealing with, this opening level actually does a pretty comprehensive job of introducing you to the cast of Operation Body Count. You've got the standard jihadis with Uzis and AKs, and then occasionally you'll have a brick shithouse of an enemy such as this one, which is a bit of an effort to take out, but ultimately worth it, because as you can see, you get yourself some dual Uzi action. Those chunkier enemies don't just come in one variety, however. In multiple levels, you'll find that they will actually be your designated targets, often with a weapon quirk all of their own, be it dual rocket launchers, flamethrowers, or otherwise. The key being that they're always fairly recognizable, clearly graduating from the Wolfenstein school of weightlifting. As for the rest of the roster, we've already run into floating laser drones and suicide bombers, but we haven't quite run into giant ravenous sewer rats, but there they are, invading bathrooms when you least expect them. Last but certainly not least, you'll also have to contend with what looks like dudes in robot suits, but what are apparently riot control drones. The only real thing you need to know about these is that they're equipped with railguns, and yeah, don't get hit. That would be bad. After that, you pretty much embark on your global tour of visiting glamorous places such as this oil rig set in the Persian Gulf, and murdering everything that does shoot back at you. If I'm going to be honest, the shooting itself is pretty standard, pretty straightforward. I dare even say no frills, and that's expected when you're running from a template such as the original Operation Body Count. I mean, I could harp on about the hit scan enemies and how they're always irritating as hell, especially at long range where you don't entirely know where you're taking the damage from because of the distance, but you've heard it all before. Really, for me, the joy of Operation Body Count is in the level design and the objectives that you can carry out within them. This one, in particular, caught me a little off guard because I was happy to flip a switch and, yeah, it kind of bit me in the ass. So yeah, it turns out that you need to pay attention when you're doing something as delicate as defusing a nuclear bomb on an oil rig, because that objective doesn't just require you to have all of the keys, it also requires you to use the keys in the right order. A real neat touch, I thought, considering it needs you to explore the level in order to find the defusing sequence first. Explorability really seems to be at the heart of the level design here, and this particular level is a really good example of that. This takes place on Alcatraz Island, otherwise known as The Rock, and yes, that is a direct reference to the film because the dastardly terrorists here have a biological weapon hidden away that we need to find and destroy before it's too late. In the process of doing that, however, you've essentially got free reign of which direction you want to go first, which building that you want to explore. Now, the obvious potential issue with this is What if the player gets lost? When you give the player the option to go anywhere, how do you ultimately direct them back to the point that's going to let them progress? For Operation Body Count, it seems the answer to that question is really limiting how much of the level is going to be sectioned off by things such as keycards. And what this means is you can just crack on with getting lost in the level, exploring every nook and cranny, fulfilling that objective to clear a building or a floor of all said dastardly terrorists. It also possibly helps that a lot of these levels aren't explicitly designed as labyrinths. They're more designed as locations that are recognizable, that have a bit of internal logic going to them. And it's that internal logic that can sometimes mean all the difference between happy exploration and frustrating loss of direction. If there's one particular level that certainly comes in at the more frustrating end of that scale, I'd certainly say that the airport level fits the bill. But when I really think about it, it suddenly makes sense, because aren't all airports meant to be labyrinthine nightmares by design? So really, I can't be criticizing this level at all. If anything, I should be praising this level for its accurate portrayal of the airport experience. Well, minus the flamethrowers and the terrorists. But yeah, there's a few aspects of this that mean you will get quite easily lost. The samey looking corridors do not help. The fact that they loop back round on themselves means that you'll be scratching your head with a profound sense of deja vu more often than not. And all round, it's just not a very pleasant experience. So, well done. 10 out of 10. Accurate portrayal of an airport in video game. Have a cookie. Or have a beer, they've got them on the help desk apparently. Now, I haven't spoken much about the weapons of Operation Body Count, and that's because they're pretty straightforward, functional, much like the shooting itself. But one thing that's always intrigued me is the fact that the weapon you have to use when you've run out of bullets for everything else is actually a sawn-off shotgun with infinite ammo. Other games will reduce you to your fists, maybe a chainsaw if you can find one. Operation Body Count says sod it, we're using the sawn-off. You'll be spending most of your time though with the Uzi, or dual Uzis in fact, if you've managed to take down your local meathead. Ammo for these are really plentiful. Most basic enemies will drop ammo for it, so when you're running low on the old AK, which is a real nice beefy sounding weapon, yeah, you can always fall back to the Uzi or dual Uzis. Picking up the rocket launcher was a little bit confusing for me because I see this thing and I expect to be using the drunk missile launcher from Rise of the Triad. It's exactly the same, but in practice it's just a pretty straightforward rocket launcher. The railgun, again, it's a pretty straightforward railgun. The flavor text when you pick it up references Eraser, a pretty entertaining Arnold Schwarzenegger film, if only for the one-liner he uses when he kills a crocodile, which is, and I quote, "your luggage." But yeah, it's a railgun. By all accounts, it's a reasonably fast-firing railgun too. Casting my mind back to something like Quake 2, I remember the railgun in that takes a little while to charge up between shots, but this lets you ping them off quite frequently, one after the other. After the railgun though, we get our hands on the flamer, which, yep, that's a flamethrower alright. That certainly turns things into a crispy charred corpse. Thing is though, I actually found it quite difficult to come across ammunition for the flamer. There was an objective in Alcatraz where you need to use one to destroy the biological weapons lab, and because I'd been dicking around with it a little earlier on, I actually didn't have enough ammo there and then to do the objective, so I had to go scavenge for some more. But last, and certainly not least, we have the... oh, wait, shit. Oh, crap, I'm dead. Bear with me a second. So, where was I? Ah, yes, the nuke launcher, which, wait for it, launches a nuke. A mini nuke, nonetheless, but it is basically the BFG, if the BFG were ridiculously unhelpful and killed you more often than it helped you, because if you go anywhere near the blast after you've fired it, you will be roasted to death by nuclear flame. I'd advise you stand back if you use it real far back, and preferably just don't use it in a sewer. So ultimately, how do I feel about Operation Body Count? Well, as I said at the beginning, this is objectively better in every way, shape, and form than the original Operation Body Count, but honestly, that's a low bar to clear. I'd like to hold it to a higher standard than that, and personally speaking, there are a few aspects of this version of Operation Body Count that I'd like to see improved. For one, get rid of them hit scan enemies. Swap them out for projectile based. I think that generally makes everyone happier by default. I also wouldn't mind some additional weapon variety. What's here is fine, but not particularly exciting. And if you're gonna replicate the whole 80s, 90s action movie aesthetic, I feel there'd be a few more additional things you could potentially chuck in there to just make that arsenal feel a bit beefier, a little bit more entertaining to wield. Other than those relatively minor points, I'd say that I had a pretty damn good time with Operation Body Count, and part of that is certainly to do with the structure of the levels themselves and the objectives within them. It always kept me engaged. I never felt like I was truly scrabbling for direction, obviously aside from the airport level, and for those of you more musically inclined, you'll also get some pretty damn funky tracks playing during the course of some of these levels too, so I imagine that'll certainly help proceedings along. But yeah, Operation Body Count is solid, and that's more than I could ever possibly hope for, especially when considering the pedigree of the original source material. So if you're in the mood for some good old-fashioned shooting with a tinge of 80s to early 90s action movie, then I think this will be right up your alley. And if you're interested, the link, as usual, is in the description below. While I'm at it, I'd like to give a great big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon. Thank you so very much for supporting the channel and for helping to make content like this possible. If you're interested in lending a hand yourself, you can find the link to my Patreon page in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments, and feel free to suggest any mods you'd like to see me cover in future episodes of Doom Mod Madness. This has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.